Well, welcome, everyone. Good afternoon to those of you in the room and to those of you joining us online. I'm Caitlin Bloom. I'm the Chief of Staff at the National Academy of Public Administration. Wanted to welcome you to the Academy. Many of you are fellows, so you're familiar with the Academy, but for those who are not familiar with the Academy, we are a congressionally chartered nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to helping leaders achieve a more efficient, effective, accountable government. And we do that through direct assistance and management studies with government agencies at all levels. We do that through our own thought leadership and convenings such as these. And all of our work is guided by our elected fellows of our academy. We have over 1,000 elected fellows, ranging from federal, state, local government leaders to academicians and other scholars. So welcome again to the Academy. I'm really excited for this particular event. Thank you to Vince Micone and Kim Walton, our co-chairs of the Standing Panel on the Public Service, and Academy board members for organizing this session. And I'll turn it over to Kim.
More that are joining us virtually. I'm delighted to welcome all of you for joining us here at the Academy's Washington, D.C. office. Today's conversation focuses on the most influential accounting tool in the federal government, the GAO high-risk list. For more than 3 decades, this list has identified programs and operations vulnerable to fraud, waste, abuse, mismanagement, or those in need of significant transformation. But beyond oversight, the high-risk list has become more important, a catalyst for modernization, improved performance, and stronger governance across the government. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from the leader of the institution that produces this work. So let me start by introducing, and it's my pleasure to introduce Orice Williams Brown, Acting Comptroller of the General Accounting Office of the United States. And welcome.
Thank you.
Let me tell you just a little bit about her background. She assumed the role of the Acting Comptroller General on December 30th, 2025. And that was following the completion of Comptroller General Gene Dodaro, also a NAPA Fellows retirement. We wish him well in his retirement. Hopefully he's somewhere sitting on a beach with his feet up. And she will serve in this position until a successor is nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate from a list provided by Congress. And I haven't stayed up to date what that progress is. Any?
It's we aren't involved in the process, so there's a commission that's formed once the vacancy occurred for the formed in Congress, and they go through the process. It's in process.
Okay. Her appointment reflects a career spanning more than 3 decades at GAO, where she has held some of the organization's most senior leadership roles. Since 2021, she served as the GAO Chief Operating Officer, which is the agency's #2 leadership position, helping guide GAO's multidisciplinary workforce and ensuring that the agency delivers reliable, timely, and relevant information to Congress. Earlier, she served as the Managing Director for Congressional Relations, overseeing the hundreds of requests GAO receives from Congress each year and serving as the critical bridge between congressional committees and GAO mission teams. She also held the Financial Markets and Community Investment Team, overseeing work on financial regulations, housing, and small business programs, and the federal government's response to financial crisis. Throughout her career, she has helped produce work that has saved taxpayers millions, billions of dollars, strengthened programs, and informed some of the most important policy decisions facing the nation. She's also a fellow at the National Academy of Public Administration and the recipient of numerous awards, including the Roger W. Jones Award for Executive Leadership and the Samuel J. Hyman Service to America Medal for Career Achievement. So please join me in welcoming Acting Comptroller General Williams Brown.
Yes. Thank you.
So we know you have an incredibly busy schedule, so thank you so much for joining us. So I'm going to just jump into the questions very quickly. So the GAO high risk list has been with us for 3 decades now, 30 years. For those who think of it primarily as an oversight tool, how do you define its purpose?
So the way I would define the purpose, part of it's oversight, part of it is helping each new Congress identify some of the highest priority areas that warrant their attention. So that's the Congress grounds the intent of the high risk list, but we also see it as a useful tool for agencies to leverage areas that they need to think about, in some cases, transformation or how they're managing certain aspects of programs. So it really serves 2 purposes, but it was very much grounded in identifying a list of those highest risk areas for the Congress when it was established in 1990.
Okay, so in some ways, you've answered my second question, which is when the high risk list began back in 1990, what problem was GAO trying to solve? But it sounds like you're saying they were trying to solve a problem for Congress.
Well, not for Congress,
Okay.
but so what happened in 1990? That was the impetus. That's when we issued our first high risk list, and we started developing the list out of a request from Senate oversight and House oversight, and it happened on the heels of a scandal at HUD. In the 80s, there was a huge scandal at HUD, and there were lots of questions about like what happened. In 89, GAO had issued a report and we laid out a number of concerns about mismanagement. There were lack of financial management controls and a number of other issues. When the request came in, the question was, is HUD an isolated incident or are there broader concerns across the federal landscape? And that's how GAO did the work, identified that HUD wasn't necessarily an isolated incident in terms of are there other programs at risk of fraud, waste, and abuse, and what they were. So the original list had 14 programs on the list. OMB at the time also looked across, they were getting similar questions, and they identified programs and said, like, HUD is not an isolated incident. This is kind of what pervasive across the government. So GAO, on the heels of doing that work at HUD, also was coming to the realization of maybe there's a way that GAO can leverage its body of work. Because if you follow GAO issues, we'll issue a report about a program and it may focus on a particular area. And then a couple of years later, we may issue another report that finds another set of issues. This was a way to rely on the full body of work on programs and make an assessment about, is this area something that warrants being on a high risk list for the Congress? So that's how we go about building the list. We look at our body of work, and we generally rely on our body of work to make a determination about whether or not to add something to the list. More recently, and I think about the work that we did on unemployment insurance in the Department of Labor. There we did leverage a lot of the Inspector General's work from the Department of Labor and added that to our body of work in coming to the decision to add unemployment insurance to the list. So that really was kind of how we started with the list. And the plan was to provide the list to Congress somewhere around the beginning of a new Congress. So that's generally the cadence of when the full list comes out. Occasionally, something will happen that we may add something to the list out of cycle, but generally, we present the list at the beginning of the new Congress. And it's GAO identifying those things that Congress, that we think warrant being on Congress's radar for that particular 2-year session.
Okay. So over the last 3 decades, what would you say has changed the most? Is it the risk themselves or how the government responds to them?
So I would say it's really been a combination of a couple of things. So the first list was very much programmatic focused. You will see with some of the areas how we approach the list evolved over time, and we may put an area on the list, like strategic human capital management, is an area, it's something that cuts across more than 20 of the areas on the list because we recognize that it was a common theme across a number of programs. Um, the need for collaboration is another cross-cutting issue. So there's an intersection between the high-risk list and our duplication, overlap, and fragmentation work because the need for improved collaboration is often an indicator that that the programs are fragmented if it requires that level of coordination. And that's something that you can see with one of the areas we added most recently in disaster assistance, with 30 agencies involved in providing disaster response and needing a level of coordination. So I think it's moved from really being about just fraud, waste, and abuse. We added programs that are in need of major transformation that speak to efficiency and effectiveness across government. So that was part of the evolution. And then it's also about um, really helping agencies to evolve and modernize as the risk landscape continues to evolve across government.
Yeah. So when we started, I didn't really introduce myself, but I'm, obviously a former federal executive coming out of TSA, and my former agency had its fair number, and probably still does, of items on the high risk list. So just walk us through the criteria for designation. What separates a program that is struggling from one that warrants the high risk status? I know it's not an exact science, but if you could just, I think our audience would be interested in, what is it that really gets you to the high risk list?
Sure. So in terms of criteria, so we developed criteria around 2000, and there are 5 areas that we look at. So we look at leadership commitment, we look at capacity, we look at our action plan, monitoring efforts, and then demonstrated progress. So those are the criteria that we evaluate programs and areas on the high risk list against. So in terms of making the decision for something to go on the high risk list, we talked about the risk of fraud, waste, and abuse. We also talked about areas in need of transformation. So we look at things like a dollar threshold. There has to be at least, $1 billion, $1 billion in terms of risk exposure. Then we look at is it nationally significant? Does it involve, health, safety, those types of issues? So we have criteria that we go through when we do an evaluation and making a determination. We also look at what the agency may be doing to address it. So we may identify a program that meets some of the criteria, but if an agency is making a concerted effort that they can demonstrate and that they are working toward and they are making progress in the area, then we may decide not to add them to the list at that particular time to allow the actions that they are taking to play out. So we do, to your point, it's not an exact science, but we do have specific things that we consider as we are making that determination.
When I was listening to you, I was thinking if I was in my former job, I would be making a list of how to stay off the high risk
Yes.
list.
And we have this publicly available. We have issued a special publication that lays out the criteria that we consider. So all of this information is publicly available. In 2022, we actually we issued a report that laid out kind of the success stories, agencies that have effectively gotten off of the list, they've made progress enough to have an area narrowed, and what they really need to focus on. So within those 5 areas of criteria, we also then lay out, we unpack each one. So we say what the criteria is, and then we walk through what that actually looks like in terms of actionable steps that agencies can take.
Yeah. So on removal, let's just stay on that, because once you're on the high risk list, it does get high level agency and attention.
Yes.
Some positive, some negative, depending on the agency. But removal from the list is a significant, is a significant thing. So what does GAO need to see to have confidence that removal is warranted?
So a couple of things. So we go through all 5 of those elements, and we rate those every high risk list. So if you're on the list, we have we evaluate performance kind of against those criteria. So what we're looking for each one is a demonstration of all of the progress toward those elements. So leadership commitment, we're looking for leadership kind of paying attention to the area. Have they designated someone to be the point person? Are they having regular cadence of meetings to assess how progress is being made? The resources capacity piece, it's just, have they dedicated resources to it? Do they have people who are working on high risk on a regular basis? Do they have people who are tracking it? If there are particular resources that need to be dedicated to addressing an issue, are they dealing with those? For the action plan, it's like, is there an articulated action plan? Has it been vetted at the appropriate levels? Does it have governance? Are they tracking performance against the action plan? Is it sufficiently detailed to lay out steps that need to be taken with performance metrics, those types of issues? Then we, if you keep going, the monitoring. So are they keeping their eye on the topic? Are they continuing to look at it? Once again, are they following through and tracking what folks who are responsible for addressing the high risk area, what they're doing and how they're doing? And then finally, the demonstrated progress. This is the one that I think a lot of agencies feel like, well, once we've done all of these things and we tell you we're going to keep doing it, then we should get off the list. And we're GAO, so we're going to trust but verify, and we're going to want to see some demonstrated commitment in that particular area to warrant us taking the area off the list, that the root cause issues are really solved. And that's a key piece of the action plan, the root cause. That's a step that agencies really can't skip over, because if you haven't accurately diagnosed the issue and determine what the root causes are, it's really hard to then put solutions in place to address them if that isn't clear.
Yeah. So this is a perfect segue into my next question, because for the taxpayer, a high risk list. Okay. For what purpose? So can you come up with and talk about any meaningful examples of where the high risk designation truly moved the needle on either performance or something taxpayers would value?
So the one that I would think about, and this is one, they may not see the connection, but the connection is huge, and that's weather satellites. For years, we had been raising concerns about weather satellites. And taxpayers care about weather satellites because if we don't have reliable data available to like the National Weather Service and NOAA, then it's hard to predict weather events. So we're talking severe weather events, hurricanes, all of those types of issues, flooding. And we were on pace to lose our ability to get key information to feed into our models to be able to help with weather prediction and preparation for severe weather events. So that went on the list. And that then made it a frontal lobe issue. Like, this is a significant issue, and it got enough attention that steps were taken to invest in and make sure we were able to have satellites in orbit that were able to provide key information back to NOAA to make sure we were able to protect the homeland and people who were at risk of severe weather events.
That's a great example. You have some commerce people in the room, former commerce people, including myself and Alan Balutis and Vince. So that is a really good example, and it's very meaningful to taxpayers. So let's talk a little bit about the what I'll call the oversight ecosystem. So it's GAO, it's the IG, and it's Congress. And having sat in the hot seat many, many times, it sometimes seems like they're operating at cross purposes in addressing high risk areas. So, from your vantage point, what distinguishes agency leaders who lean into the designation versus those who resist it?
So I really think it's, in some ways, I think high risk is probably, people view it some people view it as a blessing and a curse, and some people just want to get off the list. So I think the folks who are probably most effective are the ones that see the benefit of the designation and they lean into how they can leverage the designation to get top agency attention. Believe it or not, every agency isn't incensed when they end up on the list. We've had at least one who said, like, thank you so much for putting us on the list, because this is something that we've been trying to get top agency attention on, and we have been unsuccessful in getting their attention. This designation will help us get the attention that we've been trying to get for a while. So we actually think it's going to help us be able to really move the needle. Because people who work in government, I mean, they show up every day, they're trying to do the right thing, and they are well intentioned, and high risk can be used as a way to kind of help move that needle. Now, when it comes to like the oversight ecosystem, we try to work really closely with our IG partners in the accountability community to de-escalate and the work that we're doing and deconflict it. So when we start work, we reach out to the Cognizant IG and we'll say, like, we've been asked to look at X issue. Do you have work going on in the space? Do you have work planned? And whenever possible, we try to work to say, okay, you're going to cover that aspect, so we'll cover this aspect. Occasionally, there'll be situations where a Congress will want both of us to do something very similar. But we usually work really hard to try to make sure we have deconflicted those engagements. And the same goes with Congress. I mean, we provide the list. We recognize that the list, it started out with 14 areas on the list. In 25, we were at 38 areas. That's a lot of areas for Congress, and it's a 2-year Congress to say, like, these are the 38 most important things that you need to focus on. So we are very much trying to help Congress kind of focus its attention, and recognizing that each Congress is 2 years. So what are those things in like the next 2 years that perhaps need to bubble up? The high risk areas are important, but maybe for the next 2 years, focus here. Are there areas that are particularly close? They just need a nudge, some additional oversight. So I think we're still thinking through that. We're working on ways to make sure we are making the information as easy to absorb as possible. We recognize that folks on the Hill don't have a lot of bandwidth and time.
Yeah.
So to the extent that we can provide as much fully digested information as possible is what we are really trying to lean into.
So, blessing, yes. Curse, yes. Want to be off the list, yes. So I would feel all three all at the same
Yes,
time.
yes.
Yeah, the blessing generally was leadership attention in the agency, the resources to get off the list. So yeah, so I guess that was the blessing.
And one plug I will make, it's like sometimes there is a tendency like, okay, I'm on the list. I have these 231 recommendations from GAO. If I address all those recommendations, I'm coming off the list.
You're scaring everybody.
And
231 recommendations.
And it's not that simple. And that's why the action plan is important, because addressing open recommendations is part of the formula, but just clearing the recommendations doesn't automatically get you off the list. And sometimes we have to work with the agencies to help them understand, like, it's not just about addressing the recommendations. And sometimes we'll get requests, well, we're on the list, so you can't make any new recommendations until, like, we're off the list. So it's like they want a moratorium on any new recommendations, and we have to explain, well, no, we're going to continue to come in and monitor and do assessments, and we may find new things that require a recommendation. And that's not moving the goalposts. But sometimes folks will kind of get wrapped around an axle of thinking that, okay, this is how many recommendations we have now, right? And as long as we do these, then we're coming off the list. So that's where the root cause comes into play.
Yeah. So they
Yeah.
should not just do a scorecard and check off
Yes.
every week what they've closed out, because it may not be the end of it.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about modernization and transformation. So many high-risk areas are IT modernization.
Mhm.
As a former CIO in the audience, it's about cybersecurity, acquisition reform is usually there, financial management. They're all fundamentally transformation challenges. So how has the high risk list evolved into a modernization catalyst rather than simply an accountability tool?
Yeah. And I think that it's a perfect example. It started, as I said, with a focus on programs, and it evolved to kind of broader cross-cutting areas. IT is one of those examples because it's a challenge that's pervasive across the federal government. And this becomes a way for us and for agencies to lean into a recognition that this is something that is ongoing. It's always going to be with us. So when I think about IT modernization, I'm really taking modernization out of my vernacular because it's an evolution. Because modernization to me implies that you're going to reach a destination and we're there, we're modernized. But with technology, you're never there. It's a constant evolution that you have to go through. And we want to do our part to make sure that agencies are thinking about it that way. And also that that Congress is thinking about it that way, because it's 5-year IT modernization plan. So why are you, it's year 6 coming up, asking us for additional funds? I thought you had a 5-year plan. So, here's where I think some of the words really do matter. And I think this is where the evolution comes in, and it's another way that the high risk list can be a springboard for agencies and the Congress to continue to move the needles on these issues that are so important and constantly changing.
That is such an important point, because people think, once they're done with IT and many things in the government, you're not done.
Yes.
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 So let's look at the future risk landscape, which I'm sure is broad. So what future risks should we already be thinking about?
So, the big one is, and it's the one that everyone is talking about, and that's AI. And I think we have to really be cognizant that this is AI is a double-edged sword. I mean, there are folks that are using AI for good. They want to make the government more efficient, more effective. But there are other folks that are using it for bad. It's made fraud a lot easier to execute, and also on a scale that wasn't humanly possible before. So it's a lot easier because of deep fakes to have falsified documents that look very real. So I often wonder, like, who's winning this battle, in terms of leveraging AI. So I think that's one that we all need to pay attention to. And the other thing that we are really focused on is not missing an important step in leveraging AI. Data quality is huge because once you dig into AI, you have to make sure you really understand the data before you leverage it, because once it's trained into a model, it's trained into a model. And you also have to understand like all the data flows throughout the organization in order to interpret what's coming out of the model. You can't just feed something into AI and the answer you get is assume that it's the correct answer.
Oh, yeah.
So you really do need a human in the loop that really understands the data. So you have to put a lot of time and attention into making sure the data quality is what it needs to be. And I think based on a lot of work that GAO has done across the federal government, data quality is a known issue.
Yeah. So I mean, not a surprise probably to anyone that the future risk is AI, how it's used, how it's not used, whether it's used for good or bad, and the magnitude and the
Yes.
scale that it can impact.
Yes.
So
Huge.
I would expect many recommendations on AI for a long time into the future.
Yes.
And you're so right. I think everybody's experience, use of AI, that you actually have to know pretty much what the answer is,
Yes.
so that you can find mistakes. Now, I do want to be respectful of your
Mhm.
time, and so I'm gonna. Do we have time for questions? We do. Okay, so let me. Should I? Maybe we can go to questions now. Okay, if you're open to it,
Sure.
we're gonna open it up to questions first in the room, and I see John Pelguda has his hand up first, and a mic is coming to you, John.
So, Orice, thank you very much for that rundown. My question, I know you guys do a great job overseeing the executive branch. You have lots of recommendations, you track them over time. My question is, do you ever formally or informally make recommendations to your boss, Congress, in the sense of, maybe more oversight in this area would be useful, some budgetary adjustments here could have great payoff, or, part of the problem is this law is not having the intended effect. Some revisions to statute might help.
Yes. So we do make formal recommendations to Congress that they consider certain changes. And one area on the high risk list in particular I'll highlight is the National Flood Insurance Program. That's an example where if you look at it, I'm pretty sure that's the area. The agency has done as much as it can do to correct the issues with the National Flood Insurance Program. What remains will take congressional action. So, and we have pointed that out, that sometimes in that case, there's actually a structural imbalance in the program that perpetuates the risk of the program. And that is, it's not statutorily established to be actuarially sound. So if there's a big flood event, Katrina, then the government is on the hook for a huge exposure. So we do. So we make them formally. We also point out in the report that I mentioned on 2022, where there have been great improvements, we pointed out in some of the areas where we did see a huge move forward in a high risk area. It was because Congress really stepped in, provided oversight, and pushed the needle on taking action. So Congress definitely has a role in this in many cases.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Other question? I see one from Alan Balutis.
Have you ever considered something beyond the high risk list to be along the lines of, this is a really high risk list, and I mean at this time? And I ask because you mentioned strategic human capital management, which has been on the list since 1990. And actually underlies a lot of other issues that are on the list, IT security and cybersecurity. HR problems there, the major systems, procurement executives and program managers. So how can we give something the focus and attention it deserves? Because if that came off the list, it would be a much better world to live in. How can GAO elevate some of those issues so they really get focused on?
So I think this is the very conversation we're currently having internally. That we are having conversations with members who are huge fans of the list, but they get the list and they're like, it is so daunting when we get the list that we don't know where to start. So it's really hard to get traction. So we're currently having internal conversations about, is there a way for us to package and frame the issues differently, in hopes of, like, if you focus your attention on this issue, IT cybersecurity, for example, that will impact so many other high-risk areas. Or strategic human capital management. That's a root cause of issues at more than 20 of the high-risk areas. So make that the focus. And, on the strategic human capital management, this is not an issue about numbers of people. This is about, do you have the right people with the right skill set in the right places? So we definitely hear you on that, and it's something that we are actively trying to figure out, is there a way that we can present this differently to help move the needle more significantly across a range of areas. So thank you for that. And if you have ideas, definitely, we're all ears. Okay.
Do we have other questions from the audience? Well, good, because we could go all day, but I'm going to give you a closing question.
Okay.
So if you, well, you're in the hot seat, so you're in the position, how would you strengthen, if you just had to pick one aspect of the high-risk process to better support modernization, and what would it be?
So I think it's kind of back to what we were just talking about. It would be this issue of being able to frame the issue in a way that addresses some of those broad root cause issues that permeate across areas, so we can see more significant movement across the areas. The other plug that I would make is to really leverage that 2022 report, where we worked hard to try to provide a roadmap for agencies to follow in terms of making movement on the high risk list. So definitely, make high risk a priority, and then also make a plug. So yes, closing the GAO recommendations, it's important. So we don't want you to stop doing that, but that has to be part of a bigger strategy to get off the list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Get off the list.
Yes.
With that, I am going to, please join me in thanking
Thank you
for coming.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Yeah.
And we're going to transition to a panel that Vince is going to stay there. Ah, I don't have to move.
So one idea for the new list name is you've got to have a trend on social media. So maybe the real high risk list, or hashtag the really high risk list for those key issues. Thank you all very much for coming today. My name is Vince Micone. I co-chair the standing panel on public service for the National Academy of Public Administration. And one of the areas that we're looking at this year are areas that we can talk about and create forums to discuss how we can revitalize the public service. And we thought that a good opening discussion this year was to talk about the role of oversight and how those tools can be used constructively to help programs get better and to help government get better in serving the people. And I know from my experience in government, particularly my time when I was in senior management roles at DHS, at Commerce, Labor, and serving as Deputy Inspector General for a program at the Treasury Department, that the high risk list is more than just an oversight mechanism. It really serves as a catalyst for reform. I think it was stated, very well that it was a cursed blessing because nothing really can get leadership attention more focused than having GAO call out one of your programs, especially, and understanding that with that, particularly early on, will come the focus not only of Congress, but of the American people for seeing actual progress. And oftentimes in agencies, I found we knew the programs were in jeopardy and we were working through the system. And when GAO would point out something was a high risk issue, that would give us additional energy to move forward with ways that we can make them better. Today's panel brings together leaders and friends who've seen the process from multiple vantage points: oversight, agency management, and enterprise operations. We'll explore what happens inside agencies when they receive a high-risk designation and what separates organizations that make meaningful progress from those that struggle. So I want to start by introducing our panelists very briefly. Diana Maurer is the Director of Defense Capability and Management at the U.S. Government Accountability Office. Diana, her work is examining military readiness, force structure, and defense management challenges, and she regularly testifies before Congress on these issues. Diana and I worked together when she was Director of Homeland Security and Justice Issues, where she oversaw major assessments of DHS programs addressing GAO high-risk list areas, including acquisition, financial management, and human capital. Katy Kale is the former Deputy Administrator of the U.S. General Services Administration. In that role, Katy helped oversee government-wide operations, including federal real property acquisition and fleet management. Earlier in her career, Katy was the Assistant to the President for Management and Administration and worked in the United States Senate. She played a key role in federal workspace modernization and efforts to address long-standing management challenges in the area of federal real property and its portfolio, an issue that's remained on GAO's high-risk list for years. Mm-hmm. My colleague and friend, Kimberly Walton, in addition to her distinguished service here, is a former senior executive at DHS who served as TSA's Executive Assistant Administrator for Enterprise Support, overseeing enterprise functions including HR, acquisition, training, and logistics. She also previously led TSA's Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, was the ombudsperson, and traveler engagement. And I'm sure she is not happy, or very happy not to be at TSA right now, as we are in the lapse of appropriations. So for many of us here, and for many agencies, appearing on the GAO high risk really isn't that fun. It definitely means more tension and more headaches. But in my experience in government, whether working on management integration issues at DHS or later as Deputy Inspector General, it really does become a catalyst for important reforms. So I want to start sort of at the broader level. When you have a high-risk list designation that is government-wide, and you're a leader in an organization that has responsibility mostly, but not because of the distributed nature of that, real property comes to mind. Mm-hmm. Katy, you've observed this across multiple administrations, particularly the high-risk lists associated with federal property. And I know you were very passionate about that yourself, independently even of the high-risk list function. What typically happens inside an agency when the designation comes, or when you inherit it, when the administration comes in? How do you look at things during the time that you may not have been around as an appointee? Mm-hmm. How does it change leadership attention, congressional engagement, and management priorities?
Yeah, so I have been lucky to hold kind of the top 3 leadership positions at GSA at different times, Chief of Staff, and then coming back during the Biden administration as Deputy Administrator, but we didn't have an administrator, so I was also the acting administrator. And I can tell you, as soon as we get the high risk list, whether we're new on it or we're repeating or coming back again, the very first thing that we do is we get together with our comms team and our congressional teams, because we know that those are going to be the first questions coming in. Why are you there? What progress have you made? What does this mean moving forward? And then we bring in our career folks who have been around, who have been addressing these issues, who know deep in what's working and what's not working. And a lot of times what we're thinking about is, we talk a lot about leadership, the leaders of the organization, are they bought in? Well, when I went back and looked back to 2015 and even before that, our leadership criteria that we were talking about before is always met. It's once you get into the your resources and your capacity, that's where things start to come down. And we've taken a look at those throughout, and sometimes it works out well, and sometimes it doesn't. And I know we talked about federal real property, and one of the things that over the years we've tried different ways to address it. And this is how we're getting doing better with leases, but also getting some of the buildings that are underutilized off of our books. And a lot of the main problem is this kind of like cross-functional, cross-agency work that needs to be happening. You need to have the agencies bought in. You need to have the career leadership bought in, not just the appointee leadership. And one of the things that we tried with FRPP is we had our friends up on the Hill decided to give us some help with the Public Building Reform Board. And the problem there was that it's another person, it's another group that's in the soup. it's another cook in the kitchen. And the mission itself, kind of the what is the outcome that we want and how are we going to get to that, it was never really agreed to. It was never really concrete. And we had one group who was very, we want to move fast, and we have one group who's like, these are all of our checklists that we need to go through. And making sure that, then that's not even thinking about, the money that and the people that we need to have. And so that's a place where it hasn't worked that well. I will say there are places that cross-agency work has worked well. And one of those is, I'm trying to think, the federal security or the federal building security. Now, this is another place where there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen. You have GSA because we have the buildings. We used to be in charge of security, but that was given over to the Federal Protective Service in most cases for our buildings. So you have GSA, Federal Protective Service. Federal Protective Service is part of DHS, so DHS becomes involved. Then you have in the security committees within each building, and then you have the agencies within each of those security councils. So how do you get all of these people working and kind of marching in the same direction? A lot of that now kind of comes back to leadership. That's where the leadership needs to get involved. That's where they need to understand what their role is. And it's really this kind of consensus building, the communication at the top level to push down, not only in their own agency, but make sure that the other agencies and the other groups that they're working with understand the importance of it, even if their names aren't on the high risk list, it's only yours. So in terms of first impression, it's like, get ready for questions and then get ready to start these really great relationships to make it work.
So, Katie, I think you allude to the role of Congress. So we all know, everyone in the room knows, and if you managed a federal agency, you understand the huge backlog in repairs and updates to much of the federal government's physical infrastructure where our employees work. Yeah. And some of that has to do with flat budgets. And, some agencies like my former agency, we were not real hip when FASTA called us about getting rid of our building. And also we understood and worked with GSA because there's infrastructure within that building that is connected to DC's infrastructure for the underground tunnels. And so even when you want to move or upgrade or change facilities in the high risk list designation, there are external pressures that come into play. And I know when you oversaw issues trying to offload buildings that clearly were old, and there may have been private sector leases that would have been cheaper and more beneficial to the government, you ran into
So many problems. Yeah. I mean, I think GSA's mission during really both of the administrations that I served under, but I believe it continued, was we want to have fewer buildings, but we want to have better buildings. We want to make sure that our public servants are working in modern facilities and that they're safe and they're clean. And that is our number one priority. The problem comes in a couple of different places. One is funding, how GSA is funded, how the public building fund works, in that, you know, GSA is putting out money to, we can put out money to move you and help you move or get rid of this building, but we can't put out extra money to help this building work more efficiently because we need to go through Congress for that. And so that's some of the problems that we've worked with. There's also, you know, a lot of, like I said before, there's checklists that you need to go through. Are we looking at it from an environmental perspective? Are we talking to folks in the communities about this? And so it's not just getting, you know, your top political person to sign off. You know, in Washington, D.C., it's going to be very different from something out in Seattle, Washington. But we need to make sure that we're going through all of those checklists, and it does take time. It's often not just a let's turn on a switch and make it happen to do it correctly. But again, where we can work on communication, where we can build in kind of that cross agency, including our friends at OMB, agreement to this is what we want to do and this is the best way to do it. We're going to go much further in that direction. And I did bring up communities too, because one example that we have from this process, and again, it goes back to wanting to move fast and wanting to, you know, make sure that we're checking off all of our squares in the checklist, is, you know, there was one property, and I mentioned Seattle, Washington, that was out on the West Coast, and it was a archives building. And on paper, it looked like it wasn't being used often. It was just the archives, and we could digitize those, which we all want to do that. The PV said, "Okay, great, like put it out on a list. We're gonna get rid of that." The problem was, it was a space that was used to house a lot of the Native American artifacts from that area, and so nobody talked to the community. And so that became an issue. And so, yes, we want to move fast. Yes, we need the money for all of this, but we also have to have agreement on what the steps are and making sure that we're doing it right.
I know we worked on special arrangements with GSA where we could use and defer some of our rent payments to do some health and safety work,
Yes.
which was a creative solution that kept us under thresholds where we could notify Congress, but we didn't need to ask to move things forward. So real interesting challenges. Kim, when you were at DHS, you had to work, you know, obviously at TSA, not only internally as that organization was maturing, but also with leadership in a sprawling department to focus attention to the needs that GSA had on, or that TSA had on some of the issues that were high risk lists or otherwise. What did you see when you were there, and how did you see from your perspective the focus the department had on high risk lists?
So I'm going to start with something that Katy said, which is that most high risk list issues are enterprise issues. And so they don't fit neatly in one box. HR modernization, it wasn't a TSA issue. It was a TSA issue, but it was also a DHS issue. It's a government-wide issue. And so because they are enterprise-wide issues, I would say the first big thing is leadership at the highest level focusing in on it and paying attention to it and wanting to move the needle on it. Because if you couldn't get that attention, even if it was just TSA, you still needed the administrator to recognize that it was an enterprise-wide issue. And one of the things that the last administrator that I served under did is he reorganized the top level because, as you mentioned, I ran enterprise support. And so, my issues weren't just human capital issues, they were human capital plus IT. And they may have been human capital, IT, and acquisition. And it was strategic because I had much more synergy and working on the issue. So the first, I would say, is high level. If it's at the department level and TSA is just a participant, then at the deputy secretary list, level, the person who should be focused on internal operations has to focus in on it. The second, I think, is governance and accountability. You can't understate those two. They're sort of the backbone of government, and if they're broken, things aren't going to get fixed, and you're just going to be running in this cycle of brokenness, and you will be doing the checkbox to the GAO list. Let me just check this off. There's 130 recommendations. Let me just see if I can get them closed. If I'm close enough, please, GAO, close this one, and I can declare success. But that isn't really the point. The point is really to move the needle and to get off the list because you've actually moved the needle. So governance and accountability. And then another thing, I'm going to go back to something Katie said, and Orice is, okay, you've got 2 years of Congress. You have the political cycle, which is every 4 years as far as an election, but for the political leadership could be more like 18 months. So you have you can get one person's attention, and then they announce that they're leaving, and then for a minute it's vacant, and maybe careerists fill the void, and then somebody else comes in and their priority is something else, and so so it is sustained interest across leadership that is not easy to get in order to really move the needle as far as being on that GAO. And the bigger, I think, the agency you're working in, a place like TSA and DHS, the harder it is because there's so many more players. And I can still think of many meetings on the GAO list. They were bigger than this room, and it was packed, and everybody needed to be there, and everyone had a part to play. And so that really requires accountability. I mean, are they being measured on their movement towards their part as far as closing out a recommendation and fixing a program that's on the high risk list?
Kim, it reminds me, just TSA hiring was such an integral part of our ability to move forward on management integration reforms at DHS. That's where we first met each other and had to work together.
All my gray hairs came.
Yes, exactly.
Last month.
Because we depended on TSA dealing with the turnover issues in a very critical time where we were still coming very close to 9/11, and the impacts of that still were so evident inside with the shoe bomber and everything that happened, that TSA hiring played an outsized impact on that management integration list. And yes, I remember the roundtable meetings we had. We'll talk about those in a minute. But in terms of the contributions that you had around those areas, which I know you worked very hard in, what did you do inside of the organization so that you could effectively represent to the department and the GAO the changes that were actually taking place, because there was a time lag between the work that was being done, what we were recording, and when we were getting credit for that?
Yeah. So there were many, many iterations. I mean, when you bring up, you're giving me nightmares, TSA hiring, which was huge. I mean, from the beginning, we had to go from 0 to pretty much 60,000 in a matter of months. And then not all of the hires were the right hires. And at the time, the wages were low. So other places were hiring staff, and we had this ongoing attrition that was going on. And we're trying to hire from every place like JFK in New York or LA, which are high cost of living areas where people were traveling. But we also, there are small airports that we still also have to staff. And, it's nothing but cornfields and cows, but, we've got to, hire there. So it was a huge challenge. So HR modernization, which we didn't own, but we were trying to do our part. It really then comes down to, number one, making the case that while this recommendation in the GAO high risk list might belong to us, but it impacts every taxpayer when you get to the checkpoint. If there is a line out the door and you have a long wait time, it's either going to be the technology or it's going to be the people. And so we've got to be able to hire the people. We have to do it more efficiently. We have to be able to onboard them quickly. And so it was sort of making it real. You bring in public affairs, you bring in, congressional affairs, you bring in everyone, and you have to, sometimes you really have to tell a story of this is why this matters to you. And nobody, people, everyone in this room has probably missed a flight, but it's usually your fault.
How dare you?
When it's TSA's fault because there weren't enough people at the airport to get you through the process, or something wasn't working right. That, I think, forced the issue, and it forced people to focus, everyone from the Secretary of Homeland Security down. Nothing gets attention like a high-end business traveler who is, has the phone number of their senator to bring it very close to everyone's attention.
I think Katy and I, both having served as chiefs of staff, know how that can be a linchpin in how you build your strategy for high risk list, because your boss usually is on your back all the time, particularly whenever a hearing notice comes out about a high risk list matter. Been there, done that. And I got to know Diana through that process when she was overseeing our issue set with management integration, which was sort of a fuzzy thing that was across DHS. We weren't as effective because we hadn't fully integrated the 22 different agencies that comprise DHS. And it was put on the high risk list early on because GAO felt that if it wasn't integrated correctly, that there would be challenges. And at times we proved them right. Although with, I grew up with Star Wars, so when I had the first meeting with GAO, I felt like I was meeting with the dark side of the Force. But Diana and I had to spend a lot of time working through not just the top line requirements to show progress. And there was no handbook when we started doing this for agency success. So we had to figure out how to measure leadership commitment, capacity, what our plan looked like, if it was a good plan, how we were going to monitor progress and how we define that, and then what the progress score would be, because we very much wanted to get management integration off of the high risk list, because we had done a lot of the hard work with our bureaus, with TSA and others to improve our systems, but we needed to convince GAO that we had done that. So tell us a little bit, and I joked our first meetings when we would have big meetings with GAO on one side of the table and key representatives from the Department of others. I remember at one point that I accused GAO of putting us on a hamster wheel that we could never get off for management integration. I don't think I called it a self-licking ice cream cone to keep GAO in business, but that was probably in my mind. What based on those experiences, how does GAO really evaluate from the inside what is provided by agencies on the high risk list? What is the sort of evidence and metrics? And how do you now, as an agency, how do you work with the agencies that are responsible for high risk designations to actually come up with, here's what you need to move to get that star filled completely instead of only partially filled on the evaluation?
Sure. So the trail that we blazed on that high-risk designation for DHS eventually became a template for all of the high-risk areas that GAO covers to this day. So to kind of go back to kind of the very, very beginning, the moment DHS was created, it was enacted in late 2002, became in existence in early 2003. GAO put them on the list right away, not because there was anything inherently wrong or problematic with the department, but it was because of the inherent risk in the creation of a brand new department. This was the largest restructuring in the federal government in over 50 years. They were bringing together really a wide conglomeration of organizations, some of them pre-existing, so Secret Service, Coast Guard,
CBP.
well, the CBP was cobbled together from other organizations as well. So FEMA, sort of in that initial group, they had their own culture, they had their own processes, their own identities. Suddenly they're being bricked together like Lego bricks. But other organizations like CBP, ICE, TSA were being created from scratch, and they're being pulled together as a single department. So GAO says, you are on the high risk list for implementing and transforming the Department of Homeland Security from the day one in 2003. So fast forward to 2009, a new administration comes in, change in leadership. We've all been talking about leadership. That was critical because DHS leadership reached out to GAO and said, we want to work with you to figure out a way to come off this high risk list because we don't like the optics of our entire department being considered high risk because we think we've made good progress in knitting ourselves together. Not perfect by any means, but it's not a high risk endeavor. So that's what launched this whole process. And what we ended up doing was had a lot of meetings with folks at all different levels, from the secretary down, to try to help them understand where we were coming from a GAO perspective about why DHS was on the high risk list. And one of the most important meetings was in summer of 2010. At that point, DHS had developed its first plan, proudly submitted it to GAO. We think of ourselves as being on the good side of the force, but that's okay. We looked at that plan, we're like, not good enough. And we ended up in a meeting with the deputy secretary. And she had a few choice words for GAO. And she used a number of analogies, including hiding the ball and moving the goalposts. No hamster wheels, but that was the implication. So that was an action forcing event for us because we realized we need to be clear to the department about what it is you specifically need to do to come off the high risk list. So we crafted a letter from the Comptroller General to Secretary Napolitano with 31 things, 31 flavors of what we felt the department needed to accomplish to move from high risk to risk, right, to come off the high risk list. That triggered a lot of wonderful action on the department side to stand up organizations to help with the development of plans, tracking of plans, implementation of plans. And that became the template that we used to track DHS's progress in addressing our high-risk designation. But it was more than that because our leadership looked over our shoulder and said, oh, this is what you're doing over here. And I give a lot of credit to my boss, Kathy Barrett, who really came up with this approach. And so Gene Dodaro was the CG at the time, said, we need to start doing the same thing for all high-risk designations because it's really important for departments and agencies to understand what we at GAO are looking for in terms of success. And again, defining success as high risk to risk, not perfection. It's not going to be nirvana. We do a lot of oversight work at GAO on issues that are not high risk, and we have findings and recommendations. How do we help agencies get there? So there was a lot of engagement from all different levels at the department to develop the plans, to provide oversight of those plans internally, to reach out to us and congressional clients to make sure that they were getting traction. And one of the early signs of success was in 2013, we changed the name of the high-risk designation from implementing and transforming DHS to DHS management. So we're signaling that we were no longer concerned from a high-risk perspective about the department's ability to execute its key missions. Instead, we were focusing on that really important interconnected management. So acquisition, IT, human capital, financial management, and then the integration of all of those functions at the department level and with the components.
So Diane, one of the interesting things is you help bring to the table those teams that were cross GAO that were looking at different aspects like financial management, human capital management. So the various teams you pulled together, because of course, when they got our report, they were looking at their sections and providing guidance and feedback. How did that work internally, and how did you coordinate?
So the good news was within GAO, we had already had an established mechanism for that internal coordination. But for the most part, not exclusively, but for the most part, that was designed around specific reviews. So we stand up a team, we're going to look at one very specific aspect, we get together, stakeholders, we go write a report. This was different. This was, we had to develop ongoing working relationships internally in a way that weren't necessarily there. And so we had to reach out and figure out, okay, who were the right people who knew something about financial management. And in some cases, they'd never done work at DHS. Maybe they'd done it at other agencies. So to work with other managers within GAO to help them work with their congressional clients to build up a body of work so they could develop that expertise. And then have a lot of internal discussions around, okay, what it is, what do we agree on where the department needs to be? And do we see it the same way? Because as you were alluding to before, there were things I'm thinking about, like at DHS, they were setting up the HRIT.
Mm-hmm.
So that was human capital. So GAO's human capital people were interested in that. It was IT, so our IT people were interested in that from an oversight perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And then from where I sat at the time, Homeland Security and Justice team was like, how does this all come together in an integrated way to address the high-risk designation? So we would have internal conversations, and sometimes we saw it differently, and that was okay. But that formed our basis for how we're going to interact back with the department and with the components. And we ended up having a much richer perspective on those issues because we had done our own internal collaboration. We had a better and more deeper understanding of how these different factors played together one with the other.
You know, the interesting thing, the move towards addressing the high risk list got the department to move in directions to reduce our open recommendations with GAO and OIG. And we had a concerted view of that because we saw very clearly also with some of the IG open recommendations, with some of those from GAO, they were directly related, maybe a flavor of what we're doing. So one, we could reuse that information in other areas. And we used that as a forcing mechanism with the owners of those various recommendations to close those out when we had made sufficient progress. So even our work with addressing management integration as a high-risk matter, we actually drove down the number of open recommendations between OIG and GAO by 50%.
Yes.
And we, again, I think it was to build confidence with the public that we knew what we were doing, but also it was a factor that helped us move, as you had to move, our massive bureaucracy to get things done in a timely fashion and to report up in ways. And some of what we had was sort of like, how do we translate what we're doing so that auditors understand and can accurately account for the progress? I remember when Gene Dodaro and Rafael Boris, who was my boss at the time, both had to testify on a high risk list issue. And when the CG said DHS has made great progress on the high risk list. Of course, then we joke because then we were waiting for the comma. However, but just actually having that marker was important. And I do think it was a turning point in the approach towards how we were going to address high risk list designations and oversight from our own oversight community so that we approached it in a less hostile way. Moving away from the dark force analogy that we had when we started. And some of what that involved, frankly, was getting various parties around the table. We would do pizza parties. We would take turns hosting at DHS headquarters or at GAO and walk through different issue areas and said, okay, we're having trouble here. How can we, and with Diana pulling in the teams on HR, for example, how can we better reflect what TSA is doing and the progress they're making, even if they're not there, because we believe, even though they're not fully there yet, we've reduced this from high risk to acceptable risk. And that was, I think, a very important forcing function, but also just understanding that with the oversight community, you need to develop ways to have a conversation. And that was new for us.
It was, frankly, that was new for us. And so I remember talking to some of my colleagues at GAO at the time who said, oh, we just had the deputy secretary over at DHS. we had a pizza party and we talked about high risk issues. Like, what in the world are you even talking about? And that those kinds of engagements were important, both to make sure that DHS was staying focused, but also to make sure that at the DepSec's level, he knew who to call if there was anything we ever did that didn't really land well with the department, and it ensured those lines of communication. That's really important. So fast forward to today, DHS continues to generate the same kinds of implementation plans that you plowed the ground for that. I think they're on their 26th or 27th report. We're still on the high risk list, but it's narrowed even further. And we continue to give them credit where credit is due and hold them accountable and give them clear guidelines on where they need to go to eventually come off the list someday.
Well, I want to ask one more question. We'll go to a few audience questions. So to all three of you, and I think we maybe heard it here, that AI is likely going to be on the next high risk list. So we're ahead of the curve in understanding that. But if you all could give one piece of advice to newly appointed agency heads or leaders with responsibility, if they're on the high risk list, what should they do? What should they focus on? And how can they build attention for this? Kim,
Yeah, I'll start because it's a lesson I learned from a former chief of staff who, like me, was an attorney. And she says, the worst situation you ever have as an attorney is when your client knew something and failed to tell you about it. And her analogy was that oftentimes GAO or the IG is actually telling you something that your client knew. And so I would say, and because she had that attitude, she didn't treat the high risk designation or GAO or IG as a reputational problem. She treated it as a management opportunity and a teaching moment so that, what we should, the agency should be raising to leadership the issues of vulnerability that could get it on the high risk list. So my recommendation is don't treat it, the designation, as a reputational issue, but treat it as a management opportunity. Katie.
I think that I would say kind of like a trust but verify. The trust system, I think, needs to be in our career leadership, and really understanding that, again, your job as a leader is to communicate, is to bring people together, is to be the storyteller in chief to GAO and RIG and the public and the Hill, but making sure that you're putting into place, or that our career folks, our CIOs and our CHICOs are putting into place real data, proven data, realistic data, truthful data, and agile systems that they can tweak, as opposed to just starting all over when you're coming in and you're going to put your name on it. Like, no, we want the real data, and we want to make sure that we can tweak things here and there to get better results. So I think trust but verify.
I guess I would say, kind of riffing off what you were saying, Kim, talk to GAO, talk to GAO, talk to GAO. And when you don't think you've talked to GAO enough, talk to them again if you're responsible for a high risk area. And the reason for that is because we view ourselves as going into the room, into the meeting as, hi, we're from GAO and we are here to help. And I know it does not always feel that way, but sort of at least welcoming, if not necessarily embracing oversight, is a great tool for achieving better results for your agency and the public at large. And so the talking to the GAO perspective is important for understanding, what do we know about your program, your function, your agency, your organization? And you can use that information to help leverage and drive change, because you can guarantee that we have a repository of knowledge, both in terms of issued products as well as people who know a lot about that topic, or we can bring a different group of experts together to help come at the problem from a different perspective. And the last piece of talking to GAO is important, just to make sure that we sort of see the world in the same way, right? At the end of the day, it's a GAO report. We're going to call them like we see them in terms of making progress on high risk, but we don't want there to be surprises either. So having those lines of communication opens, so you know that when we issue the next high risk update, you're going to know, I really think that we should be able to close out these three things. GAO says we should only close out the one, but we understand the areas where we might see the world a little bit differently. So that's really beneficial, and GAO is there to help.
You know, when you mentioned Kathy Barrett,
Yeah.
I was working on making her my best friend, because we might as well just have breakfast, lunch, and dinner together, and we can talk over these open items. So you're absolutely right. Talk to GAO, and talk to them some more.
Yep.
And after we got our first favorable response, we didn't have a pizza party. We went out to happy hour. But I would say one of the issues that we did at DHS also on these critical matters was we had some people who were fully responsible. And I know with the executives that had responsibility, a part of their performance plan was not getting off the list, but it was making sure that your agency, your area of responsibility was effectively responding to those matters. And so that was another way that we really sent a message internally that this is not just a check the box issue. This is real, and we've got to get it done. And when we get this done, we'll be serving our constituents better. We'll be serving the American people better. And frankly, when you know you're doing the right thing and you want to get credit for it, you work a lot harder to make sure that you're communicating effectively. And I think that that is important with any relationship. Certainly it is with oversight. Because most people in the oversight community, and having been on both sides as a deputy inspector general, we want to give credit when the agency takes action. And so it was one of the ways that we moved in that direction. Let me ask, are there questions from the audience? We'll get you. So Carrie, fortunately, when we worked together at Labor, neither of us were involved in the unemployment list, high risk list. So when that came up, I was like, that's
It is true. And in fact, that is a reason why they have gotten a qualified audit opinion for the last 2 or 3 cycles on the agency financial report, which is doesn't allow them to qualify for a SEER award and other things. So it has real implications. Carrie Neal from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and I just wanted to talk to Katie about a bit about assets under evaluation. Right? So it's a going concern, and for real property management. And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on how we reconcile the substantial investments that agencies have made in fit out with the real possibility for displacement in the event of a decommissioning of that property. And in our case, we invested almost $100 million in state-of-the-art facilities out at the Suitland Federal Center. And we found that we are an asset under evaluation. So, and I'll pose that to you.
Great question. Just a reminder, I am not there anymore. I think, and that's really hard, right? Like putting money into getting it to be that place that I was talking about at the beginning, a better office, a better warehouse, and actually a lot of people, when they think of GSA, they think of office buildings, but we have labs and warehouses and parking garages and all of these different things. But when the agencies have put their money into that, and then it's going to be pulled away, what I would recommend is really, what I would have done, let me say it this way, what I would have done when I was there, talk to OMB, talk to your biggest fans up on the Hill, and really explain how much money is going to be lost by doing this. I'm not sure why they're saying specifically that space is going away, but really telling the story of why it is beneficial to stay there. Not only the money, but the we have X percentage, a high percentage of people who are supposed to be reporting to the office are in the office every day. If we move to a different location, we're going to not have this relationship with a partner agency, a sister agency that we work with often. It really is, I think, we found when we had a building on the list, and I say we, the time that I was there, if we had a building on the list, you know, often we would be up in front of, say, Jason Miller at OMB saying, but this will save us money over here. And then we had our sister agencies say, well, but this will save us money over here. And allowing that other person to kind of be the arbitrator and seeing how we can, you know, get to a decision in a better way. But yeah.
You're right, it is PTSD thinking about some of these.
I know. We were talking about FBI building earlier. So.
Hi, thank you. Great discussion, Vince. Thanks for moderating. Thanks to the panel. Great insights. In the last year, there's been a lot of discussion about the future of oversight in a world where AI is here, and given the changes that have been occurring across inspectors general's offices and other things. So I guess the question, first for GAO, but also generally, how do you think about modernizing the process of developing the high risk list in this kind of, in the environment we've got? Are there opportunities using technology to make you know, Katie, you talked about real-time monitoring of information. Are there other ways to think about that? You know, there are nonprofits like 4250 More, which are former IGs that are thinking about this modernization. What are some ways that can move forward on that? And the Academy might be able to think of some ways to follow up on those opportunities. Thanks.
Now that is a great question, and we are thinking about that right now. In fact, we're already thinking ahead to the next update or the next issue of our high risk report, which will be coming out in a little less than a year. And as we're moving towards that, we want to think about how do we communicate the results of that work in a way that's more easily and more quickly understood by the Congress and the general public, but also more fundamentally, how we're going to collect and do the analysis and generate that product. Because I still have PTSD from some of the reports we issued in 2013, 2015, 2017, where we ended up with 500, 600-page reports, which were very detailed, which gave a great scorecard for anyone who was paying attention. But that's not, you know, a 600-page PDF is not the way you want to communicate to the Congress or the general public. So we're thinking about it from that perspective. In terms of how we execute our audit work and do our fundamental oversight functions, we are looking at how to leverage AI as a tool. It's probably going to end up being akin to when we started using computers 30, 35 years ago, but on steroids. So we're thinking through that, and we want to be able to leverage that technology, but we also want to ensure accuracy and independence, right? Because that's core to what we do at the GAO from an oversight perspective. We're a nonpartisan agency. We're part of the legislative branch, so we're not part of the executive branch. So we want to be able to ensure that whatever we do, we maintain that independence and that it shows and is understood by the Congress as well as the broader public.
I have an example of kind of small AI benefiting the work that we were doing, or augmenting the work that we were doing. We were on the list, I believe, at least last time I checked, we were still on the high risk list for kind of the real property status. Basically, let me, without terminology, we're basically, where are all the buildings that we have? Talking before, you know, we have all of, you know, we have our headquarters, but then we also have, you know, which is easy. GSA is at 18th and F Street. I know that. But, you know, when you get out into the middle of the country, it maybe is route something on, you know, 8 miles down or something. So we needed to know where all of these buildings were, facilities were. And we were on the list, because what GSA was doing was going to the agencies and saying, you need to give us your data. What is the address of your building? Where is it located? But right around 2020, that switched to, all right, AI, give me all of the addresses that are public for, you know, Department of Labor. Then being able to cross-reference that quickly with what we have, and then going to labor and saying, this is what we have. You don't, is it accurate? How can we make it, we're making it easier on the agencies by the use of kind of like the smaller AI. You weren't in this like big bubble that we are right now, but and I think that those are some places that we had a great CIO and a great CIO team that they were able to say, oh, we can help, internally at GSA, be like, we can help you with this. This is going to be really a lot easier if we use this way. So that, from an agency standpoint, allowing AI to kind of be your co-pilot, if you will, like we're still responsible for it. We need to make sure it's accurate. We need to, work with our agencies to make sure that it's accurate. But it takes a lot of time, out of a day. If you can just type it in and you get, some results that you can start checking against.
I mean, using the tools just, and some of the work that I did was looking at improper payments. And so we would get massive amounts of data from states. We would have our own data of beneficiaries. We had to go to local and county governments for some. So we'd have this massive amount of information and only about 140 agents to look at $1.4 billion worth of investments, of which 99% are having the intended impact. But we used to, it almost was like you were fishing in the ocean to find something. With AI, we can harness those tools to do a much deeper dive, check that data that we receive from the states, instead of doing manual cuts for every individual. And then further, deduplicate the names and flag where there may be issues so that you can use the limited amount of time and FTEs that you have for oversight. They can be more dedicated towards purpose. I think that's what a lot of the EIGs would say, because a lot of times we're looking at just massive amounts of information and trying to get it down. Now, frankly, even pulling together the information, because some of our reports were huge. I mean, I think of, the talent that we put getting charts done, getting all the information, tell the story. Well, we can be much more effective, even when we have the brightest people pulling all that together, to do it more quickly so that we can focus more on the substantial work that we need to do fixing the programs instead of creating the document.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to jump in, because when you said IGs, it got me thinking again. I mean, this is important not just to the agencies, but obviously to GAO and our IGs. We need to make sure that we're training people and we're bringing in people who are trained in this, because if an agency, say GSA, is way out ahead and we're using AI or we're using robotics in different ways, and then our IG comes in or GAO comes in and says, well, we don't know how to use that, so this is a concern. That becomes a problem. We want to make sure that we're working with our partners on this, and that that everybody is at least at a basic level of this. And we're not all there right now, but as this continues to go through, I think that that's going to be a very important part.
I think we have time for one more question.
I'll take it if somebody else hasn't spoken yet, though.
And are there any questions online? Because we take one from online as well as John.
I'm here, so I'm not asking a question online today.
Okay, so just very quickly, throughout my career, I've had some instances where I've worked in oversight organizations, and it's great when you work with an organization that you're doing oversight, but they really want to hear what you have to say, and they want to, how can we get better and all that. My question is on the other end of it, though. There are occasions where I've done a closeout with an organization, and from reading their language, they'll nod and they'll be polite, but they have no interest in making changes unless it was this, okay, you violate law, that has to be corrected, and we're going to follow up. That's easy. But it's like, we think this practice would be a better practice, you would have better results and all that, and they don't care. They just, it's like, hey, this is the way we do it. They don't say that, but you can tell this is the way we do it, and we're going to keep doing it this way. So thank you very much. Goodbye. Any strategies for how do you deal with an oversight organization that doesn't really want to hear the message?
Kim, recalcitrant IGs, auditors, how did you deal with them?
So I think when that happens, often there is a lack of trust and credibility. I mean, if the agency is coming from a perspective that they have a gotcha IG, that the recommendations are meant to harm reputationally or harm someone's tenure in an organization, you get that, yeah, okay, what time is this meeting over so that I can go back to doing what I'm doing. So I think on the side of the oversight organizations, they always have to be operating from a position of we're here to help you, and here's how. We are bringing credibility. These are facts. These solutions are implementable. They may not be easy, but if you can get to the finish line, things will be better for the people that you serve, the American people that you serve. And so I think that that credibility has to be built. And I would even put a little bit of the onus on those oversight organizations of finding, which is in a room usually with a lot of people, that executive who has the is open-minded to implementing and doing better. And especially if it's someone who's going to, and this is where I think the careers really play a big role, because they're going to be there, right? Because sometimes you're talking to the political, and not only are they looking at the clock, but they're looking at another clock of how long they're going to be, in the organization. Whereas you may have a new, freshly minted SES who's got another 10 years, and so they may be more vested. So I think they have to come with credibility. It can't be a got you. They've got to build the relationship. The collaboration, the coordination, and the relationship still matters. Because some IGs are like, I have the power, I have a hammer, and you're the nail. And if you come at that, it's just not going to work.
Just real quickly, being in oversight when the situation is described as sort of flipped, and I had to deal with that. I've had to deal with that a few times in my career. I always try to find out from someone senior on the other side of the table, what are we missing? What are we missing? There's clearly something that we're not understanding. Help us understand it, because at the end of the day, from GAO, right, we're never part of the organization. Like, the IG is technically within the department, a separate part, but we're completely from the outside. So help my teams understand, take us on a site visit. Let us watch something that you do so we can understand better why what we've been saying in the past is not resonating. And we generally have success with that. I used to do a lot of oversight of law enforcement agencies who typically are much more comfortable asking the questions than answering the questions, right? So being open to understanding and building that relationship, and that can yield some benefits. Thank you.
John, if you really want to have fun, IG organizations do audits of other IGs to make sure that they're following all of the requirements. If you want to see some real fun, be the seat when you've got an IG audit coming in of your agency and your IG to make sure that you're doing everything that you're supposed to do. It's fun. I mean, that's a popcorn thing that you need to do to watch that movie. Do we have any questions online? Thank you. So, as we've heard today, progress on oversight issues requires sustained leadership, credible metrics, and constructive engagement by all parties, and a commitment to institutional change that extends beyond administrations. And this is one of the reasons why we have the GAO high risk list, because we all understand how intractable and tough some of these issues are. And they wouldn't be on the high risk list if they weren't tough issues. And I think, frankly, that there are only 38 probably says something about how effective government is, because when you think of how massive our mission sets are, knowing that only 38 really raise to the highest level of deep concern, we should look at that not and say, well, those are the 38 things we're not doing right, but there are many, many things we do effectively. And I don't think that we oftentimes give government and the people who work in it credit for keeping everything working as well as we do every single day. On behalf of NAPA and our standing panel, on behalf of Kim and myself, I want to thank Orice Williams Brown for the fireside chat, which was very interesting to hear about her experiences with that. And our outstanding panelists today, Diana Maurer, Katy Kale, and Kimberly Walton, for all joining us today. We want to thank everyone who's come down here to the Napa offices the first Monday after we lost an hour of sleep, and to everyone who is joining us online. Thank you very much, and we look forward to other programs that we'll be having through our panel later this year. Thank you all.